Your soulmate just wrote you a secret love letter. It disappears in 5 minutes. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because something happened in complete silence, far away from your awareness, yet somehow connected directly to you. And listen to this, your soulmate never planned to write this letter. They didn't sit down thinking they were about to pour their heart onto a page. It began as a quiet moment, one of those rare moments when life slows down enough for hidden emotions to rise to the surface. A moment when distractions lost their power, when responsibilities faded into the background, and when the truth became impossible to avoid. And your heart needs this right now because in that moment, one thought kept returning to them over and over again. Not a random memory. Not a passing feeling. You. The more they tried to focus on something else, the more their thoughts circled back to you. One memory led to another. One feeling unlocked another. One question opened the door to many more. And before they realized what was happening, they found themselves staring at a blank page, trying to understand why your presence still carried so much weight in their heart. And listen to this, the first words came slowly. Hesitantly. As if a part of them was afraid of what honesty might reveal. But once the writing started, something shifted. The walls they had built around their emotions began to weaken. The excuses they had been telling themselves began to lose their power. And your heart needs this right now because every sentence they wrote carried a truth they had been avoiding. They wrote about moments they never forgot. They wrote about conversations that stayed with them long after they ended. They wrote about the comfort they felt around you, the connection they could never fully explain, and the strange way your energy seemed to remain present even when you were nowhere near them. And listen to this, the deeper they went, the harder it became to stop. What started as a few thoughts quickly became page after page of honesty. They wrote things they had never said aloud. They admitted feelings they had barely admitted to themselves. They described memories they thought time would erase but never did. And your heart needs this right now because the letter became more than words. It became a mirror. A reflection of everything they truly felt beneath the surface. Every line brought them closer to understanding something important. Every paragraph revealed another piece of the truth. And that truth was simple but powerful, you mattered more than they had allowed themselves to believe. And listen to this. There was a moment when they stopped writing and read everything back. Slowly. Carefully. Word by word. And as they looked at what was written in front of them, something inside them changed. Because for the first time, they saw their feelings clearly without denial, without fear, without distraction. The page held every emotion they had been carrying in silence. It held every unanswered question, every hidden hope, every unspoken truth. And your heart needs this right now because that realization hit them harder than they expected. Suddenly, they could no longer pretend the connection was insignificant. They could no longer convince themselves that these feelings would simply disappear. The evidence was right there in front of them, written in their own words. And listen to this, as they stared at that letter, they realized it was never really about the page. It was never really about the words. It was about the truth those words revealed. A truth they could no longer ignore. A truth that had been quietly waiting beneath the surface for a very long time. And your heart needs this right now because that secret letter changed them. Even before it disappeared. Even before the moment ended. Something had already shifted inside them. Something had already awakened. And whether they are ready to admit it openly or not, the person who finished writing that letter is not the same person who started it. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after they started writing that letter, something unexpected happened. What began as a simple attempt to organize their thoughts became something far more powerful. And listen to this. With every sentence they wrote, another layer of truth revealed itself. At first, they thought they were just reflecting on the past. They thought they were simply putting memories into words so they could finally move on from them. But the deeper they went, the more they realized they were not writing about the past at all. They were writing about feelings that were still very much alive in the present. And your heart needs this right now because that realization caught them completely off guard. There were moments when they stopped writing and simply stared at the page, surprised by what was appearing in front of them. They saw emotions they thought had faded. They saw memories they thought had lost their importance. They saw pieces of their heart that they had hidden even from themselves. And listen to this, they wrote about the small moments first. The conversations that seemed ordinary at the time but somehow stayed with them. The unexpected smiles they still remembered. The little details they never told anyone they noticed. They wrote about the comfort they felt around you, the way your presence seemed to calm something inside them, and the strange feeling that no matter how much time passed, certain memories never truly disappeared. And your heart needs this right now because those memories were not random. They were connected by a single thread. Every story they wrote somehow led back to the same person. Every reflection pointed in the same direction. Every emotion carried the same name. And listen to this, as the pages filled, they began to understand something they had been avoiding for a very long time. The connection meant more to them than they had ever admitted. Not because it was perfect. Not because everything had always been easy. But because it was real. Because it stayed with them when they expected it to fade. Because it continued to matter when they thought it shouldn't. And your heart needs this right now because sometimes the strongest truths are the ones we spend the most time trying to ignore. The more they wrote, the less they could deny what was in front of them. Every sentence removed another excuse. Every paragraph removed another layer of doubt. Every word brought them closer to complete honesty. And listen to this. There was a moment when they stopped trying to sound logical. They stopped trying to explain away their emotions. They stopped editing their feelings to make them easier to understand. Instead, they simply wrote the truth. Raw. Honest. Unfiltered. And that was the moment everything changed. Because once they allowed themselves to be completely honest, the letter became more than a letter. It became a confession. Not necessarily something they were ready to send, but something they could no longer hide from themselves. And your heart needs this right now because the person writing that letter was beginning to see the connection through completely different eyes. They were no longer focused on fear, distance, or uncertainty. They were focused on what remained despite all those things. And what remained was stronger than they expected. The feelings remained. The memories remained. The importance of the connection remained. And listen to this, by the time they reached the middle of the letter, they were no longer writing because they wanted answers. They were writing because they had started finding them. The page was revealing truths they had spent a long time avoiding. It was showing them that some emotions do not disappear simply because they are ignored. Some connections do not fade simply because time passes. Some people leave a mark on the heart that remains no matter how much life changes. And your heart needs this right now because that understanding was growing stronger with every word they wrote. What started as curiosity was turning into certainty. What started as reflection was turning into realization. And by the time they looked down at the pages in front of them, they knew they were only beginning to uncover what that secret letter was truly trying to reveal. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because as they continued writing that secret letter, something inside them began to change in a way they never expected. And listen to this, what started as a collection of memories was becoming something much deeper. It was no longer about remembering the past. It was about understanding the present. The more they wrote, the more they realized that the feelings they thought they had buried were still alive beneath the surface. Every sentence seemed to reveal another truth. Every paragraph seemed to remove another layer of doubt. And your heart needs this right now because there came a moment when they stopped writing and simply stared at the page. Not because they had run out of words, but because they were overwhelmed by how honest those words had become. They saw things written there that they had never said aloud. They saw emotions they had spent a long time trying to explain away. They saw hopes, fears, questions, and feelings that had remained hidden even from themselves. And listen to this, for the first time, they were looking at their heart without any filters. No excuses. No distractions. No attempts to minimize what they felt. Just truth. Pure and undeniable truth. And your heart needs this right now because truth has a way of changing everything once it is fully seen. Once they saw those feelings written clearly in front of them, they could no longer pretend they were insignificant. They could no longer convince themselves that the connection meant less than it actually did. Every word on that page pointed toward the same realization. You mattered. More than they expected. More than they admitted. More than they were prepared to acknowledge. And listen to this, as they continued reading the letter back to themselves, memory after memory began returning with new meaning. Moments they once overlooked suddenly seemed important. Conversations they barely thought about before now felt unforgettable. Small details they never shared with anyone else became impossible to ignore. And your heart needs this right now because those memories were showing them something important. They were showing them that the connection had never truly disappeared. It had simply been waiting beneath the surface, quietly existing while life moved forward. And listen to this, the deeper they reflected, the more they realized that writing the letter had become a journey of self-discovery. They thought they were writing about you, but in many ways they were also discovering something about themselves. They were discovering how much fear had influenced their decisions. How much silence had shaped their actions. How often they had ignored their own heart because it felt easier than facing the truth. And your heart needs this right now because that realization can be life-changing. Once someone understands how much they have been hiding from their own feelings, they begin to see everything differently. They begin to question the walls they built. They begin to reconsider the distance they created. They begin to wonder what might happen if they finally allowed honesty to lead the way. And listen to this, there was a moment when they almost stopped writing altogether. A moment when the emotions felt too real, too powerful, too difficult to ignore. But instead of closing the letter, they kept going. Instead of turning away from the truth, they moved closer to it. And your heart needs this right now because that decision changed everything. Every word that followed carried more honesty than the last. Every sentence revealed a deeper understanding. Every paragraph brought them closer to accepting what their heart had been trying to tell them all along. And by the time they reached the final pages of that letter, they were no longer the same person who had started writing it. They had uncovered truths they could no longer deny, emotions they could no longer dismiss, and a connection they could no longer pretend did not matter. And this was only the beginning of the realization that would completely transform the way they saw you, the way they saw themselves, and the way they saw the future. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because by the time they reached the final part of that secret letter, something extraordinary had already happened inside them. And listen to this, they were no longer writing to understand their feelings. They were writing because they had finally understood them. The confusion that once existed was fading. The uncertainty that once made them question everything was losing its power. And in its place, something much stronger was beginning to emerge. Clarity. Real clarity. The kind that changes a person from the inside out. And your heart needs this right now because as they looked at everything they had written, they began to see a pattern they could no longer ignore. Every memory pointed toward you. Every emotion connected back to you. Every meaningful moment somehow carried your presence within it. And listen to this, that realization didn't arrive gently. It arrived all at once. Like a wave that had been building beneath the surface for a very long time. Suddenly, all the pieces fit together. The reason certain memories never faded. The reason certain feelings never disappeared. The reason they always found themselves thinking about you during life's quiet moments. And your heart needs this right now because for the first time, they stopped trying to explain it away. They stopped looking for reasons to doubt what they felt. They stopped searching for excuses that would allow them to remain emotionally distant. Instead, they simply accepted what was there. And listen to this, acceptance changed everything. Because once someone stops fighting their own heart, they begin seeing reality differently. They begin noticing things they once overlooked. They begin understanding emotions they once avoided. They begin recognizing truths that have been waiting patiently for acknowledgement. And your heart needs this right now because that is exactly what happened to them. They began to understand that the connection was never something they imagined. It was never something temporary. It was never something that existed only in certain moments. It had been real the entire time. And listen to this, as they continued reading the letter back to themselves, there was a moment when they became completely still. A moment when no new words came. A moment when they simply sat there, absorbing everything they had written. And in that silence, something powerful happened. They realized that the letter was saying things they had needed to hear themselves. It was showing them truths they had spent far too long avoiding. And your heart needs this right now because sometimes the most important message in a love letter is not for the person receiving it. Sometimes it is for the person writing it. Sometimes it exists to reveal what the heart already knows but the mind has been afraid to accept. And listen to this. The more they reflected on what was written, the more they understood that this letter had become much more than a collection of thoughts. It had become proof. Proof that the feelings were real. Proof that the connection mattered. Proof that some emotions remain strong no matter how much time passes. And your heart needs this right now because that proof changed the way they viewed everything moving forward. No longer were they trapped between hope and doubt. No longer were they caught between honesty and silence. Something had shifted. Something had awakened. And for the first time in a very long time, they felt ready to stop running from what they truly felt. And listen to this, although the letter would soon disappear, the realization it created would not. The words might fade. The page might be gone. But the truth they uncovered would remain. It would stay with them long after the letter vanished. It would continue shaping their thoughts, their choices, and their understanding of what this connection truly means. And by the time those 5 minutes were over, they would realize that losing the letter was never the important part. The important part was discovering the truth it revealed.
Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after everything that letter revealed, after every hidden feeling found its way onto the page, after every memory was finally given a voice, they reached a moment they never expected to experience. And listen to this, they looked down at the letter one final time and realized they were no longer reading words. They were reading their own truth. The truth they had avoided. The truth they had questioned. The truth they had tried to explain away so many times before. And your heart needs this right now because that realization changed something deep within them. For so long, they believed that time would provide answers. They believed distance would make things easier. They believed that if they ignored certain feelings long enough, those feelings would eventually disappear. But as they stared at the letter in front of them, they finally understood that some emotions are not meant to disappear. Some emotions remain because they are trying to teach us something. Some emotions remain because they are connected to something real. And listen to this, every paragraph of that letter seemed to carry the same message. Not in the same words, but in the same feeling. A feeling of connection. A feeling of significance. A feeling that no matter how much life changed around them, certain parts of their heart always found their way back to you. And your heart needs this right now because they were no longer able to dismiss that pattern. They could no longer pretend it was coincidence. They could no longer convince themselves that it meant nothing. The evidence was everywhere. In the memories they chose to write about. In the emotions that surfaced without warning. In the details they remembered even after all this time. And listen to this, the most surprising part was not what they discovered about you. It was what they discovered about themselves. They discovered how much energy they had spent avoiding vulnerability. They discovered how often fear had influenced their decisions. They discovered how many opportunities for honesty they had allowed to pass by because uncertainty felt safer than truth. And your heart needs this right now because awareness like that changes a person. Once someone sees themselves clearly, they can no longer return to the same patterns without noticing them. Once someone recognizes their own emotional walls, those walls begin to lose their power. And listen to this, as they reflected on everything they had written, they began imagining what it would feel like if those words were no longer trapped on a page. What it would feel like if honesty moved beyond writing and became a conversation. What it would feel like if the truth they had finally admitted to themselves was someday shared openly. And your heart needs this right now because for the first time, that possibility did not feel impossible. It did not feel distant. It did not feel like something that belonged only in dreams. It felt real. And the more real it felt, the harder it became to ignore. And listen to this. Even though the letter was meant to disappear, the impact it created was only growing stronger. The words themselves were temporary, but the understanding they created was lasting. The page may vanish, but the realization would remain. The letter may fade, but the truth behind it would continue living inside them. And your heart needs this right now because they are beginning to understand that some messages are not written to be preserved forever. Some messages are written to transform the person who writes them. Some messages exist to reveal what has been hidden. Some messages exist to prepare someone for what comes next. And by the time they reached the end of that secret letter, they realized it had already done exactly that. It had shown them what mattered. It had shown them what remained. It had shown them a truth they could no longer deny. And as the final minutes slipped away, they understood that the letter itself was never the destination. It was only the beginning of a much larger realization that was still unfolding. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because this is where everything finally comes together. This is the moment where the letter disappears, but the truth remains. And listen to this. After reading every word one last time, after revisiting every memory, every feeling, every realization that found its way onto the page, they understood something that changed everything. The purpose of the letter was never to stay hidden forever. The purpose of the letter was to reveal what their heart had been trying to tell them all along. And your heart needs this right now because for the first time, they were no longer questioning what they felt. They were no longer trying to analyze it, explain it away, or convince themselves that it meant less than it actually did. The uncertainty that once surrounded their emotions had begun to disappear. What remained was clarity. Pure, undeniable clarity. And listen to this, they realized that every word they wrote pointed toward the same truth. Every memory they described carried the same feeling. Every emotion led back to the same place. No matter how far they tried to look ahead, no matter how many distractions life placed in front of them, there was still a connection they could not ignore. There was still a presence they could not erase from their heart. And your heart needs this right now because that realization did not create fear anymore. It created acceptance. Acceptance of what they feel. Acceptance of what the connection means. Acceptance of the fact that some people leave an impact that time cannot remove. And listen to this. As the final moments approached and the letter prepared to disappear, they found themselves surprisingly calm. Not because the emotions were gone, but because they finally understood them. There is a special kind of peace that comes when someone stops fighting their own truth. There is a special kind of freedom that comes when someone finally accepts what their heart has been trying to say. And your heart needs this right now because that is exactly where they are now. They are no longer running from their feelings. They are no longer hiding behind uncertainty. They are no longer pretending that what they feel is temporary or insignificant. And listen to this, the letter may vanish, but the transformation it created cannot vanish with it. The words may disappear from the page, but they cannot disappear from their heart. The memories may no longer be written in front of them, but they remain alive within them. The realization may have started with a letter, but it has become something much bigger than that. And your heart needs this right now because this is the moment where everything shifts from understanding to intention. From realization to possibility. From hidden truth to future action. They are beginning to understand that knowing the truth changes responsibility. Once someone sees clearly, they must eventually decide what to do with that clarity. And listen to this. That is the question now resting in front of them. Not whether the feelings are real. Not whether the connection matters. Not whether the memories meant something. Those questions have already been answered. The only question that remains is what comes next. And your heart needs this right now because that question has already started creating movement inside them. It has already started shaping the way they see the future. It has already started changing the choices they may eventually make. And as the final seconds pass and the secret love letter fades away forever, they are left with one undeniable truth: the letter disappeared, but the feelings did not. The page vanished, but the connection remained. The words faded, but the meaning stayed behind. And for the first time in a very long time, they are allowing themselves to believe that some truths are too important to remain hidden forever. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because what happened after the letter disappeared was something they never expected. They thought that once the words were gone, the emotions would become quieter. They thought that once the page vanished, they could return to life as it was before. But listen to this, the opposite happened. The letter disappeared, but the truth it revealed became stronger than ever. And your heart needs this right now because there are moments in life when writing something down changes everything. Not because another person reads it, but because for the first time, the writer sees their own heart clearly. And that is exactly what happened to them. The letter may have vanished, but the realization remained standing right in front of them. It remained impossible to ignore. It remained impossible to explain away. It remained impossible to forget. And listen to this. They sat there in silence after the letter was gone. No page. No words. No distractions. Just their thoughts. Just their emotions. Just the truth they had uncovered. And your heart needs this right now because silence feels different when someone finally understands what they have been feeling. Before, silence was uncertainty. Before, silence was confusion. Before, silence was a place where questions lived. But now, silence had become clarity. Silence had become understanding. Silence had become a mirror showing them exactly what mattered most. And listen to this. They began replaying everything they had written. Not word for word, but feeling by feeling. Memory by memory. Realization by realization. They remembered the moments that appeared on the page. They remembered the emotions that surprised them. They remembered the truths they finally admitted. And every time they reflected on those things, the same understanding returned. You still occupied a place in their heart that nothing else had replaced. And your heart needs this right now because they are beginning to understand that some connections are not measured by time. They are measured by impact. Some people leave a mark so deep that even long periods of silence cannot erase it. Some people become part of a person's emotional story in a way that remains meaningful no matter how life changes around them. And listen to this. They are no longer trying to convince themselves otherwise. That stage has passed. The arguments they once used to create distance no longer feel convincing. The explanations they once relied on no longer feel strong enough. Because every path of reflection keeps leading them back to the same place. Back to the same truth. Back to the same realization. Back to you. And your heart needs this right now because that realization is changing the way they view the future. They are beginning to imagine possibilities they once refused to consider. They are beginning to think about conversations they once avoided. They are beginning to wonder what might happen if honesty finally replaced silence. And listen to this, those thoughts are no longer frightening in the way they once were. They still carry uncertainty. They still carry vulnerability. But they also carry hope. Hope that clarity can create understanding. Hope that truth can create peace. Hope that some things are worth expressing rather than keeping hidden forever. And your heart needs this right now because the transformation that began with that letter is still unfolding. It did not end when the page disappeared. It only entered a new stage. A stage where awareness becomes intention. A stage where understanding begins shaping future decisions. A stage where someone starts realizing that knowing the truth comes with a responsibility to honor it. And listen to this. They are becoming aware of that responsibility. They are becoming aware that some feelings deserve acknowledgement. Some emotions deserve honesty. Some connections deserve clarity. And your heart needs this right now because once someone reaches that level of awareness, remaining exactly where they are becomes difficult. They begin searching for movement. They begin searching for answers. They begin searching for a way to align their actions with what their heart already understands. And listen to this, there may still be moments when they hesitate. Moments when old fears try to return. Moments when uncertainty attempts to regain its influence. But those moments do not last the way they once did. Because every time doubt appears, it encounters the same truth. The same realization. The same understanding that the letter revealed. And that truth continues standing strong. And your heart needs this right now because truth has a remarkable quality. Once fully seen, it cannot be unseen. Once fully understood, it cannot be forgotten. Once fully accepted, it begins influencing everything that follows. And that is exactly what is happening now. The truth they discovered is shaping the way they think. It is shaping the way they reflect. It is shaping the way they view what comes next. And listen to this, they are beginning to realize that the most important part of the letter was never what was written. The most important part was what remained after it disappeared. The awareness. The clarity. The understanding. The acceptance. Those things stayed. Those things survived. Those things continue growing stronger. And your heart needs this right now because that growth is creating movement beneath the surface. Quiet movement. Thoughtful movement. Intentional movement. The kind of movement that begins internally before it ever becomes visible externally. And listen to this. They are no longer searching for proof of what they feel. The letter gave them that proof. They are no longer searching for confirmation. The honesty they discovered gave them that confirmation. Now they are searching for courage. Courage to trust what they know. Courage to honor what they feel. Courage to stop allowing fear to make every decision. And your heart needs this right now because courage is often the final step between realization and action. It is the bridge between understanding and expression. It is the force that transforms private truth into shared truth. And while that bridge may not be crossed today, they are moving closer to it than ever before. And listen to this, every day since that letter disappeared, the realization has remained. Every day, the understanding has remained. Every day, the connection has remained. And that consistency is teaching them something important. It is teaching them that what they feel is not temporary. It is not impulsive. It is not a passing emotional reaction. It is something deeper. Something steadier. Something real. And your heart needs this right now because reality has a way of revealing itself through consistency. What fades quickly was never meant to stay. What remains through time carries meaning. And what continues returning despite distance, silence, and uncertainty deserves attention. And listen to this. That is the lesson they are beginning to learn. The lesson hidden within every word of the letter. The lesson that remained after the page disappeared. The lesson that continues shaping everything they understand about this connection. Because even though the letter vanished forever, the truth it revealed remains alive within them, growing clearer with every passing day and guiding them toward a future they can no longer pretend does not matter.